Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-awwaleen wal akhirin Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barik wa sallam. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, and his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, to our friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, this is another opportunity for us to reflect upon an extremely important part of history. And this is so important that I believe that anybody who wants to rule over a Muslim country or a major Muslim organization should actually study this section of Islamic history and the principles that come out of it. Because history really is the experiences of people. And Islamic historians were not supposed to be looking at history only as facts and figures, but really it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has willed things to happen in our lives, and this is recorded, and other people can benefit from it. And so there are certain points in the history of humanity that sort of shine. There are other points that are really important, but they've been covered up. So what we are doing in this course is to try to uncover information, to go behind the vault, to go into information that is not available to the general public, but yet is so important, especially to Muslims, that I believe it would make a major difference in how our countries are run and how our leadership functions. And we are also trying to, again, unravel that relationship between North Africa, and we're talking about even Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, like right across the North Africa and Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. And this is so important that it impacts the world today. And people are asking about this. And so in looking at this, we want to, in this particular period, look at the rise of civilization, how a civilization can rise. Because this is one of the great lessons that we can take from studying Al-Andalus, and that is the rise and the fall, the cycle that people go through. And so this can show you the process of rise. Because we were dealing with around the 8th century, beginning of the 8th century, 700s, the Iberian Peninsula was controlled by Visigoths, and they were ruling in the name of Trinitarian Rome. And so they were enforcing the Trinity upon the people of the land. And the people of the land included the Vandals, who were part of the original population, and also Jewish tribes who had fled to the Iberian Peninsula around 586 BC, and other people who believed in God. And so the Visigoths were enforcing this concept of the Trinity on the masses of the people. At the same time, it was a terrible tyrannical rule. Taxes were raised. There was no chance to express yourself. It was a true tyranny. And it was during this time, the Muslims had come across and taken over North Africa. The emir of the Muslims was Musa bin Nusayr, rahimahullah. And he was approached by one of his leaders, a Christian, who had accepted Islamic rule in the section called Ceuta, which is in Morocco, that little tip in Morocco. He had accepted Islamic rule, and his daughter had been humiliated by Roderick, the leader of the Visigoths. He wanted, his name was Ilian or Julian, he wanted revenge. But Musa bin Nusayr was not ready to go over to the Iberian Peninsula when he had so much to deal with in North Africa. And so eventually, when Ilian proved his sincerity, Muslim forces went across and they defeated the Christian Visigoth Trinitarian army of 100,000 with the great leader Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah. They defeated them in 711. And after that, Musa came across, and within a few years, just about all of the Iberian Peninsula was in the hands of Muslims. For 40 years, that part of the world had experienced freedom like they hadn't experienced in hundreds of years. But Musa and Tariq were called back to Damascus. There were political issues going on there amongst the Umayyads, and they were called back to Damascus. So there was no ruler. That the information had to come either from Qayrawan in Tunisia or from Damascus, and that wouldn't work. And there was power struggles going on. There were different sections of the Arab population. There were the Quraysh people of the Banu Fihr. There were Yemenis. There were Shamis or Syrians. There was Amazigh or the Berber people. There was other African nations. There were so many different peoples within the Muslim ranks who were struggling for power and needed that leadership. And it's at that point, as we learned, that Allah Azza wa Jal raised up Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah, who is part of the Umayyad clan that was under attack by Abbasids. All of the Umayyads were being wiped out. And so Abdurrahman, fleeing, a young man, 20 years old, fleeing from the Abbasids, who had brought together a coalition of people who were oppressed underneath the Umayyads. Because one of the weaknesses of the Umayyads is that they favored Arabs over non-Arabs. So this is a major problem that was happening in the cities. And because the majority of people were actually non-Arabs, they had embraced Islam, that's the opposite of the way that you should actually rule. And so the Abbasids then brought together a coalition of people who wanted to change the leadership. And they succeeded in defeating the Umayyads. All that was left was just a few. And Abdurrahman, rahimahullah, and his sisters and his son and his friends, and just a few people were left, his brother Yahya. They were fleeing from the Abbasids, who were known for dressing in black. Their flag was black, fleeing from them. And eventually Abdurrahman was able to escape. And so he reached North Africa. And one of the key points that we brought out was that although Abdurrahman, from his father's line of lineage, was from Banu Umayyah, that's Quraysh, but from the mother's side, she was Amazigh. And so she was from the Nafza clan, there on the outskirts of in Tunisia. And he succeeded in taking refuge with his clan. Again, this is entrance of African people. This is the Amazigh. These are the indigenous people of North Africa, Sahara Desert, and much of that region. And so he took refuge with them. And eventually, when he was informed by the scholars that there's leadership needed in Spain, in Al-Andalus, he went to Al-Andalus and he was accepted. So if you look at the map, you can see it's an amazing journey he takes all the way across there. And this is in a time when you don't have transportation like today. So he is literally walking and riding and hiding and spending time. This is an amazing story, which hopefully one day could be even animated or could be brought, because people tend to want to see things these days. And he made it there. And after a period of time, he was able to consolidate his leadership. And he initially was supported by Amazigh people, Berber people, and the Yemenis, who were there also in Spain. And although he was attacked by the Abbasids, the Khalifa called Al-Mansor, he sent an army but Abdurrahman defeated them. And that's where he got the name Falcon of Quraysh. And he centered himself in Cordoba. So that was the base, sort of in the center of present-day Spain. And he had amazing qualities. Now, this is part of the leadership training that our leaders need to go through. Because number one, he was fair in his dealings with people of the book. And so instead of just taking over the main cathedral that had been there for hundreds of years, it was first a temple in Roman times, and then it was turned into a cathedral, right, by Christians. He purchased it for 100,000 dinars. And this is an actual picture taken from what is left of the Jami Mosque, the cathedral there in Spain, because the Spanish, they did not destroy the arches and the basic frame of the masjid, but they put their cathedral and their places of ritual in the middle. So he was an amazing person. And instead of just thinking about himself, you see, this is the second key point of a leader. Instead of thinking about himself, he thought about the people. What do the people need? So he lifted the taxes. He fed the poor, right? He would be seen in public. He would actually walk in the streets, put on regular clothes. He would even make Jumu'ah prayer as the imam. He would go to janazah. He was known by the masses of the people. And that is a key point of the leader. It's one of the key points that comes in some of the famous leadership treatises, how to lead. One of the key points is never separate yourself from the people. Always keep your connection to the people. And you'll see leaders, when power goes to their head and they disconnect from the people and what is going on the ground, this is the beginning of their end. And so he encouraged education as well. Every child, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, could get a basic education, reading, writing, arithmetic, basic education. Muslims went on to higher Islamic studies if they wanted. Jews actually had higher studies as well. And so this was something that was encouraged by Abdurrahman. That's people coming in. Yeah. And he also, again, looked at the society itself. So he encouraged skills training, trades, especially trades. Everybody should have a trade, especially pottery, glass blowing, paper making, weaving. He was very much into using your hands, right, and being natural, down to earth. And that is the type of lifestyle that we need today. We're being overcome by cyberspace. But that is how Muslim societies historically, have been able to keep the balance. Could you close the door? And he encouraged not only trades, but he encouraged the formation of guilds, just like unions, because he wanted people to have power. You see the thinking now, that if the people share in the power, then that there's a better chance for the society to be healthy. And this is an amazing point. He also made it clear that there's no compulsion in religion. Truth stands clear from falsehood. And he did not compel Christians or Jews to become Muslim. So this is a dynamic society. He also planted crops. They studied to see which are the best suitable crops. They found citrus fruits, peaches, apricots, pomegranates, cotton, rice, sugarcane, dates. This is industry. You're becoming self-sustaining, and you also start to export. Okay, so this is how he's thinking now. And he revolutionized and built up his ports, like in Lisbon and Malaga, so that he would have trade with the society. So therefore, Muslims lived a very simple, uncomplicated, industrious life. And because of this, and because of showing Islamic behavior, thousands of people actually started to embrace Islam. Naturally. No force, no army, nothing, but just wanting to be part of this lifestyle. And because it was an open society, there's not barriers in between the religions. That's called convivencia. So the religious barriers are broken down. We can all understand where the other one's coming from, okay? So we can listen to the other side, okay? No propaganda and hatred is there, okay? So because of this, he set the stage. He laid the foundation for an amazing society. Remember, Muslims had authority in Spain and Portugal, not all of it at the same time, but they were strongly there for 781 years. And if you ask the average Spanish person, I'm not talking about somebody from America or Germany, ask the average Spanish person how long were Muslims there in Spain, they would probably say only a few years. The Moors just came in and they were defeated, and that's it. And the Spanish even have celebrations up until now where they depict Spanish soldiers fighting against Muslims. And they shoot off guns and they have a big holiday. I was there in Spain one of the times during the holiday. So we just stayed in the hotel, right? So they wouldn't shoot us, right? But literally, they have a holiday. The defeat of the Moors. This is within their culture up until now. And the hoods that they wear with a point on the top was eventually developed by the Ku Klux Klan. You know KKK in the South? They got their hood and that thing from Spain because that's the actual hood that they wear themselves. Because they represent one of the most racist groups possible. People who committed genocide and were able to wipe out their enemies and establish this society. So Abdulrahman al-Dakhil, he ruled for 33 years and 4 months, approximately. Okay? And he was a tireless leader, being sincere. He didn't consider himself to be Khalifa or anything like that. He was an Emir, right? But he established an Umayyad presence because it was broken down in other parts of the world. But he made a mistake. Or we could say that it was by his family they made a mistake. And it was the same mistake made by the Umayyads in the East, right? And without reading the book, does anybody know what it is? Remember Muawiyah? He trusted his son Yazid. And Yazid was not qualified because Islamic rule is supposed to be what you could call meritocracy. You know, you have so-called democracy, which is supposed to be the rule of the people, although it never happens like that. And you have theocracy, different, they use the word, but meritocracy means the people who have the most merit, who deserve to be in the position, they are the leaders. That's a meritocracy. So it would not be based upon any particular group or clan. We do, however, if we find somebody from the Quraysh, if we do find somebody from the family of the Prophet ﷺ who meets all of the qualifications, who has the merits, then we would prefer that because then they remind us of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it keeps a flow in our history. Now, there's a great historian, intellectual, whose theories had profound effect upon even Western thinking. And this is a person, Abdurrahman ibn Muhammad ibn Khaldun al-Hadrami, right? He's known as Ibn Khaldun. And he was born in Tunisia around 1332, okay? And he was so influential that he's actually considered to be the father of social sciences. So like sociology and a lot of these things, they get their theories, a lot of their theories from him. And if you go to the sociology department, they'll tell you that. But you won't know that in public, that it's an Arab, right, who's actually in back of a lot of their thinking. He was, and again, look at the closeness of Spain and Morocco. He was originally from Andalusia. Okay, his family was well-to-do, and they were, scholarly people. And because of the pressure being put on by the Trinitarians who were coming down and killing people and whatnot, they immigrated to North Africa. So that's a North African person in Tunisia who's actually Andalusian. You see the connection? That's the same way why you say, why are Moroccans so emotional about defeating Spain? Why are they so emotional about defeating Portugal? Because there's something behind this. Okay, he's a good example of this. He would have been a great scholar in Spain, but his family was forced out, driven out at the point of the sword. And he went over to Granada, and he spent some time in Granada, in Spain, some time in Cairo, Egypt. He was such an intellectual, so high in his thinking, that everywhere he went, people wanted him to be their teacher and to be their qadi. When he went to Egypt, in Cairo, they made him the mufti of the Maliki school of thought. Because, they were dealing with Ahl Sunnah, so you have 4 major schools. So they made him the mufti of the Maliki school of thought. And everywhere he went, he was recognized by this. It's even interesting that Timur, who was of Turkish Mongolian origin, and during this time, he was conquering Central Asia. You'll see his artifacts are in Uzbekistan, Timur. And he was from the Mongolian lineage, but he was a Muslim. But he used Genghis Khan's methods and slaughtered people and whatnot. But what he used to do was, he was a cunning person. He would slaughter people, but he keeps all the scholars and all of the artisans, he keeps them. And he slaughters the masses of the people. And so he was, and so it turned out that Ibn Khaldun was part of a group that was sent to fight Timur-Lenk. And they were surrounded in a fort. And when Timur-Lenk found out somehow that he was there, he wanted to talk to him personally. So they lowered him down in a basket from the walls of a big fort, right? And they brought him to Timur-Lenk. Now, if you want to study somebody interesting, Timur, Timur, Timur-Lenk means Timur the lame, because he had a limp. He's a really influential person in history, right? So Timur-Lenk sat with Ibn Khaldun, and he wanted to know, things about Islam. And then he asked him, "Tell me about North Africa." And he gave him some idea of North Africa. And he was also taking information. And Timur-Lenk let him go, respected him. And when he got back to Cairo, he explained to the leader about Timur-Lenk, because he had all the information about his army, the size of his army, like what weapons they were using, their strategies, and whatnot. So he's a highly influential person. So what is important about Ibn Khaldun is that he intended to do a world history, okay, an aggressive move. He spent a lot of his life as a diplomat, moving from place to place. So he started out with an introduction, al-Muqaddimah. So this is like you're doing a book and you do an introduction. So the introduction gives you some theme and some ideas about what's going to happen. He's looking at world history. And this Muqaddimah was so powerful that people study the Muqaddimah by itself. They don't even read his world history, because the Muqaddimah is so deep. Because what he did was, as a historian, he didn't just study kings when he died and when he was born and this and that. He studied the relationship of people, the rulers to the ruled, to how the society changes. You see, sociology and all that, that's where it comes from, thinking. European didn't think like that before. Okay, he was the one that introduced and organized this type of thinking in his Muqaddimah. And because we're going a little bit deeper in this class itself, I wanted to show you some of his principles. This is for those who are taking our course, who are avid historians. If you want to go a little bit deeper, okay, you can go as deep as you want, but I'll give you these principles and you can take it deeper because this is really, really heavy information. He's talking about history being a cycle, that we're moving in a cycle. And he said there's 5 historical stages, like a dynasty. How does a dynasty rule? Okay, you see Umayyads, Abbasids, Ottomans. You can go to any society and you'll start to see how they're ruling, right? Especially if it's a dynastic rule that has like a family and whatnot, those type of societies. And he said the first is the foundation. So when these societies are developed, they begin with the leaders are really strong and they have principles. They unite the people. They're courageous. That's the conquest. And you could say that Abdulrahman al-Dakhil, he's number 1. Okay, so he set the foundation. That's how these societies begin. 2, and of course, these are general principles. This is not every single time exactly, but you watch when we start to study Spain, what happens. You keep his principles in mind. The second point is personalization of power, and that is that many times an absolute leader develops. So you get a clan and a ruler, and from that ruler comes an absolute leader. And this is the mistake that Abdurrahman's family made, that when he died, they chose his son to take over. You see, like Muawiyah did too, right? So now it went from being a khilafat to mulk. It was a kingdom. That's the difference between the two. And generally speaking, people like families. Because, if you know the father and the grandfather and they were really good leader, their qualities could be in their son. So people relaxed. I mean, we're Canadians. I mean, Trudeau. You remember Pierre Trudeau and what he meant to Canada, right? So Justin sort of in his shadow, right? People have this type of thinking, right? America has their Roosevelts and Kennedys and whatever. I mean, every country has this type of thinking, and they have, you can sort of know where the leaders are coming from. But what starts to happen is an absolute leader comes in, and he starts to develop around him a professional army. So it's no longer just those who are defending Islam, those who want to go to paradise. It's an army, right? Where you're paid and where you're organized and your allegiance is to the state. It's no longer to your principles. You're a professional army, right? Like you see the police forces and the militaries, and the soldiers will say, when they're killing people, I'm just following orders. So you say to the soldier, wait a minute, is this right or wrong? I'm just following orders. That's a so-called professional army, or the bad part of a professional army. The third part is, when this develops, you got good principles, you got your leaders still, you got power, you got a serious army, that you will have growth and expansion. So now you'll start to expand. And it reaches the people in many cases. There are achievements in architecture, science, literature. And then many societies develop the cities, urban life comes. That's dynasty, right? Ibn Khaldun's genius. He's studying how people function, right? So urban life. But then with the urban life, things start to get relaxed. It gets a little peaceful because you got soldiers out on the border. So you have tranquility, but your economy is still strong. Okay, but something's happening now. It's not like the beginning. You're starting to get a little weak, and this leisure urban life is coming in to the people. Okay? And the fourth point coming in after growth and expansion is stagnation. Leisure now, the first generation struggling out in the field, principles. The next generation, they're still keeping the principles, but then the next one, they are born in the palace. They don't know. They read about their parents, but they didn't live with them. You see? So what can happen is people get satisfied. And the leaders may, because they don't have that struggle spirit, they become weak. And in some cases, luxury comes in. And this is what was happening in Spain. Okay, the luxury, the level that they reached, and you will see what eventually happens. And then, because sometimes corruption comes in, the government becomes incompetent and decadent. So now the society is stagnating. Okay, and the fifth point is decline and dissolution. So this is where they start wasting everything. The soldiers become unfaithful. They'll turn against the leader, right? Immorality sets in. That's a key point, immorality. Okay, all the different alcohols and all the corruptions come in. And one interesting point you bring out, in some cases, they start blaming their ancestors. And they say it's not our fault, it's those people who came before us. This is an interesting point if you study different societies, how they even start blaming their ancestors, right? And so these are the sort of like the 5 general points. He said it's like a cycle that people are going through. And you can study this cycle. And what is so interesting about Al-Andalus is it is one of the clearest forms of the cycle. You can literally follow this a number of times. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to follow the cycle. And out of this, hopefully, should come principles. Principles for governance, principles for living, even running your organization. So back to what is happening, in our story of Al-Andalus. Abdulrahman II, rahimahullah, he passes away. His successor is Hisham. And we'll use the term the first. They might say Al-Awwal or whatever. I mean, we'll use the term the first because it's easy for us to. Hisham the first. Now, he was generally a good ruler. He was trained by his father, and he wasn't like Yazid and Muawiyah. So he was just, and he actually spent time struggling to defend Islam, and he completed the building of the masjid in Cordoba, the Jami Mosque. He completed the basic building. It was extended more later, but the basic structure was completed, by Hisham. But he only ruled for 8 years. Okay, and but one of his weaknesses now, look at the differences. He never appeared in public without bodyguards. You see power now, how it reaches people's minds. He needed bodyguards. His father would dress like a common person and turn up in the masjid or walk down the street and listen to what people are saying. That's the kind of person that his father would do. Not all the time. Obviously, he had to be protected. But here it becomes part of the state rule. You must have your secret service, right? You must have your bodyguards around you all the time. So immediately, there's kind of a separation between him and the people. Okay? And after his time came Al-Hakam the first. Al-Hakam the first. And Al-Hakam, he was a just ruler. He's still on a good roll. And what was interesting about him, he loved learning. So he was heavy into education. Okay, and he actually established the University of Cordoba. And that university could rival the Qarawiyin University in Morocco, and also Cairo and Nizamiya in Baghdad. So this was a major Islamic university. And many times Muslims who are studying Islamic history, they don't realize the level that Muslims went to in Spain. So they actually had a major university, and some of the major scholars within fiqh and hadith and whatnot are coming out of this area. Okay, but now power is coming. So his bodyguards, he enlists, he's got about 5,000 horsemen. That's his personal forces. I mean, not all the time around him, but he's got 5,000 underneath him, and he's got 1,000 on foot. So he can bring them at any point in time. Okay? And this is something, it was used by people in other parts of the world as well. Okay? It's not the sunnah of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And you see the Khulafa al-Rashidin, they didn't do this. Umar ibn Abdulaziz, he didn't do this. Okay, but it was a trend to have your own private army that is not even connected to your own family, in case somebody in your family fights you. Okay, so Al-Hakam, he still good leader, amazing achievement with the university. Things are still moving fairly well. After his time came Abdulrahman II. So you had Abdulrahman al-Dakhil, who could say the first. This is the second. Okay? And but he was the eldest son of Al-Hakam. You see how now it's become a kingdom, right? He's like the crown prince. So you're losing the Islamic concept of meritocracy. It's now an Umayyad dynasty. And but they describe his rule as a time of peace and splendor. Okay, and he ruled for 31 years. So that's serious time that he actually ruled. But he developed something else now. Whenever he went in public, he had to be veiled. He wouldn't even show his face to people. He would wear like a veil. And you'll see in some parts, that has stopped in much of the Muslim world. In West Africa, there are some people still who the leaders wear a veil. In Sokoto, in Nigeria, the north, and some of the desert, they wear a veil. But he veiled in public. He didn't want people to actually see his face. Okay, so that's a problem in terms of transparency. During his time, it's interesting for those of you who follow series, your Netflix fans or whatever. The Vikings attacked Spain. Okay, and the Vikings came off the coast, and they attacked. It was during his time. Abdulrahman II, the Vikings attacked, but Muslims were ready for them, and they defeated the Vikings and drove them off. Also in the north, you remember in Leon, in that province far in the north where the mountains were, where the Muslims originally, they didn't take that area, and because they figured it was a waste of time. Nobody can even live up there. From there started to come counter-revolutionaries. The Trinitarians regrouped, and they started coming from the north. But he held them back. So Abdulrahman II, doing a good job. But still, we're losing something, right? We're losing something in our leadership. Muhammad I, he comes next. Same family. He ruled for about 30 years. And he held off an attack, another attack from the Vikings. Another group came. He held them off. He held off the people in the north. Okay, and when he passed away, the next ruler, Al-Mundhir, came. He only ruled for 2 years. He was killed in battle. Now, this is where a break comes in the link. There's a break coming. Because when Al-Mundhir died, they expected him to live longer. But his crown prince, at that time, he was Al-Mundhir was killed 2 years, and then Abdullah took over. And Abdullah ruled 25 years. Now, the problem was that later on, you're going to see a break in the link. Okay, this is too soon for the break. Al-Mundhir, 2 years. Abdullah, 25 years. Okay, but now it's starting to get corrupted. It doesn't have that same, it needs revival type of thing within it. And this is where probably the second most important leader after Abdulrahman al-Dakhil now takes over, and that is Abdulrahman III. Okay, and his name is Abdulrahman al-Nasir lidinillah. Okay, and this man ruled for 50 years. Half of a century he ruled. Who was Abdulrahman al-Nasir lidinillah? This is a person who should be known by every student of Islamic history. But I can believe, outside of students who study North Africa and Spain, 90% of the students, if you said his name, they wouldn't know who you're talking about. Muslims, that's how our own history is being covered up. Abdurrahman took over in 912. Okay, and what did he do? He immediately abolished the taxes. All of the taxes that were against Islamic law. See how he thinks now? He's thinking like the first Abdurrahman. So he abolishes all the wrong taxes. He encourages agriculture. He encourages trade, right? He's thinking about national prosperity. That's how he's thinking now. Okay, so this is an amazing, that's our leadership. He's bringing back that spirit again. So he's going to keep, the ball rolling. And this is now Abdulrahman III. Now, this is what's interesting about this. Look at his position now. And if you look here, if you look to the right, you see, below you see North Africa. Then you see Cairo. Go to the east and you see Iraq. You see Baghdad, right? So there's the Khalifa there in Baghdad. Then you have Cairo, right? North Africa. That's where he is now. Now, what is strange about this? And that is that what he did was, because of the situation that he was in, he declared that he was the Khalifa. He said, I am Amir al-Mu'mineen. It's no longer an Amir. He declared that he was Amir al-Mu'mineen. Why did he do that? Because the Abbasid leader in Baghdad, Al-Muqtadir, was a weak leader. So the Abbasids were falling apart. Also in North Africa, in Egypt and in North Africa, started in Tunisia, there was a Shiite dynasty, which started off the Mahdiya. It started off in Tunisia. It moved into Egypt, the Fatimids. And the Fatimids are a leading Shia group. And they felt that their leader was the Khalifa. And they were fighting against the Sunnah. Okay? So you literally have two Khalifas there. One which is weak, the Sunni. The Shia one, and these are Shia Ismailis. So they are not even what we call today Itna Ashari. They're the Ismailis. So they're bringing in strange beliefs. Fatimids, right? We studied the Fatimids, and you will see. Also, there were some revolts within his own territories. So he declared he was Khalifa. So at this point in history, there was 3 Khalifas in the Muslim world. There was 3. Okay? And there's 2 we were from the Sunnah and 1 from the Shia. Okay? Now, what is interesting about this is that Abdurrahman was so successful. He was such an amazing leader that people started to recognize him because the agriculture, the trade, the education, this was really the high point of Europe. This should be studied as European history. Why is it? Because during that time, and it was 929 that he declared he was Khalifa, the king of France submitted to him. The kings of Rome, the leaders of Rome, submitted to him. Constantinople submitted to him. Okay? They all sent ambassadors. You know how they send ambassadors to Washington and, whatever? They sent ambassadors to meet him, and they, recognized his authority and even paid a type of tribute, to the Muslims. Um, all around Spain, of course, the people, submitted to him. He eventually defeated the Fatimids in Tunisia, there in North Africa. So he was moving to the point where one year during our trip to Spain, we had a delegation from Switzerland, and Switzerland has some good Muslims, and they organized themselves, and a group of them came with us to Spain, and they said there is a mountain, there is an area in, Switzerland. Switzerland is a unity of mountains. It's like a socialist society based on these mountains, clans. It's an interesting country to study because they have their own military, their own governance, whatnot, and they're famous, right? Now they got the banks too, right? They have security, but they trace within their history that when they were being attacked by some of the people of the north, Germanic tribes, they asked for help from the Muslims. And Abdurrahman sent a force and defeated the Germanic people. And so they gave him property in Spain, Switzerland. So the Swiss Muslims actually know the place that was controlled by Abdurrahman al-Nasir in Switzerland. This is how influential this man was. And what is happening now, and this is the thing which is so interesting about this, is most of this Mediterranean is recognizing him as the Khalifa of the Muslims. So to visit the Khalifa, which direction do you have to go? To visit the Khalifa? If you're from Germany, or if you're from Constantinople, which direction do you have to go? West. Normally, when you think of the Muslims, you think of East, right? You think of Cairo, you think of Iraq. But now they were going west. So this is Western Islam. Understand this concept, right? This is what they want to block out of the history books and out of philosophy and all that. This is Western Islam. This is European history. A serious part of European history, which is being blocked out of the books, right? In which Muslims need to revive. Now, in order to solidify himself, every Khalifa, every ruler has some sort of mark, in a sense. What is his mark? He decided that he would build a city called Medina to Zahra. And he would build a wonder city. It's a wonder city. Now, this is a picture that I took. This is an archaeological site. If you go to Cordoba now on a journey, they have a museum and they are digging an archaeological site here. And Harvard University and also the Ismaili Aga Khan. He knows how to spend his money, right? So Aga Khan, they put money in, and it's a beautiful museum. And it shows the history of the Muslim world and all kinds of things. Is an archaeological site. Now, if you can look at this picture closely, and you look down where the green field, and it starts to turn like reddish, maroonish, and then green there, under the ground is more buildings. They have only excavated a section of this. At one point, because how the earth will reclaim everything. There was nothing. It was totally covered over. I'm going to show you what happened. And somebody saw it. They start digging. And now it's a wonder city that was developed by Abdulrahman and Nasir. And he did this in order to solidify himself, his mark on the earth. But the problem is this Sunnah? No. This is not the prophetic way. Even though he's a great leader, he's holding off the forces. It's an unbelievable show of power that he's doing. I mean, they have one report. You know, it's unbelievable the things that they were actually doing within this city. And you had some hostile Christian forces that came, spies that came in order to meet Abdurrahman. They wanted to see, like, what is this? What does he have? So they sent their delegates. And they took them first, because this is outside of Cordoba. So what he did was they studied it scientifically. It's right at the base of a mountain. And there's also springs, water running. So it's perfectly set in terms of mathematics, physics, the water running, and it leads you back to Cordoba, the city itself. And the main roads are coming from Cordoba. So they started off, and they have these delegates on this main road. And all along the road are soldiers, right, with swords and spears. And the delegates are watching, looking at these people. And then they reach a certain point, and there's somebody sitting there. He looks really regal and dressed in clothing. And so then they fall down on the ground and bow down to him. Because that's the way they used to do it in those times, right? And the person said, no, it's not me. Continue. So they continue down the road, and another person's on the stand, and he's looking regal and everything. So they fall down. And he said, no, it's not me. You got to go all the way. So they come now within a part that's got like these like fountains and man-made lakes and whatnot. Then it takes you to the back, and suddenly they come into an open area, and it's sand. And in the back, they see a person who is sitting in the back, and he's got in front of him the Quran, a sword, and a bowl of fire. And he's dressed in simple clothes, simple white clothes, white cloak, turban, no splendor at all. This is the Khalifa. And he's sitting there waiting for the delegation. This is psychological, right? Because he knows what these people are up to. And so he says to them, they're standing looking at him after going through all of this, and he said, this book here, we have been commanded to give you this book, and you have the right to accept it or to reject it. But if you reject this book and you reject Allah's message, you're going to get this. And he shows him the sword. These are spies, right? You see this, you got to get this. And if we take your life, then you're going to end up in the fire. Right? So by that time, they're trembling, right? And then they sign the agreement to pay tribute to the dynasty, and then they leave. For the average Christian and Jew, it's convivencia, right? People are living, society's growing. These people were troublemakers, right? And so these are the kind of things that were going on there in Medina to Zahra in this society. So this is the Medina. They're putting it back together. It's an amazing visit, to go if you get a chance to go. This is amazing, this archaeological site and the museum. And they actually have a film that sort of represents what life was like during the time of the Khalifa. Excellently done. Beautiful visit to visit Cordoba. Now, Abdulrahman and Consolidation, 50 years he ruled. But he's a human being. And when he passed away, here's the weak link in the succession. Al-Hakim II, right, took over, and he died in 366, and he was succeeded by his son Hisham. And his son Hisham was 9 years old. You see the problem now? If it was meritocracy, he's a little boy. But if it's based upon family and crown prince, he is the Khalifa, and you put the crown on his head or the turban on his head, but he's 9 years old. The actual ruler was the wazir. They call Hajib. And the wazir, Muhammad ibn Abi Amir. He was Yemeni background. And he was the wazir. And he was crafty. And many of these wazirs, and you see them in Baghdad, you'll see them amongst the Seljuks. This is the one underneath the Khalifa, right? And if he's weak, he rules sort of from the shadows. So he was ruling, and eventually he decided to take everything. and he called himself Al-Mansor, right? The victorious. And he eliminated all opposition. So all the members of the family that were there, he either killed them or imprisoned them, because he's not from the Umayyads. And then he takes over in succession. Okay? So this is now Muhammad ibn Amir al-Mansur. And no doubt there was weakness within their rule. And the Trinitarians in the north were coming down and they were attacking and whatnot. And al-Mansur was a tireless leader. They say he carried out 52 campaigns against the Trinitarians. This man was serious. They hate him. If you read European history, they'll say Al-Mansur. They call it. They hate him because they were attacking and killing Muslims in the north, and so he said, "No, we're going to stop them." And they had a place, Compostela, and they had this Santiago. They had a special place where they're supposed to have the grave of James, one of the disciples of Jesus, and it's like a pilgrimage place. Okay, and so he took the army there, conquered the place. The place where the bones were, he left it, because even though he didn't believe in it, but he respected them. And he took the bells of their city, had their own people carry it back to Cordoba, and melted it down and made lamps for Muslims to put in the masjid. This guy was ruthless, right? He went overboard. He was Al-Mansur. Okay? And this is the rule of the leadership. And what this is showing actually is the rise. And it's still within the point of, the conquest. It's starting now in stagnation. Okay? But now we have to keep in mind now, because I don't want to stop here, because people would say, okay, that's the history. That's not the history. This is the history of the rulers. What about the society itself? The society itself was thriving. It was an amazing society. And even though Al-Mansur, in his stabilization of power, what did he decide to do? He built another palace called Medina Zahira. You have Medina Zahra. He built another one called Medina Zahira, because he's got to prove he's a big boy too. So he builds Medina Zahira in order to establish himself. But by 1002, he died. Okay. Now, Andalusia in its heights, around this time, between 900 going to 1000 and even after it, this was, you could say, the height of the society. It was growing because, remember, there was trade, there was prosperity. It was, the key place in Europe itself. There was a university there. It was a great university. Scholars were, European scholars, kings were sending their children to be educated there, right? So it was height. So by the year 1000, even before it, really, it's in the 900s going to 1000 and over. Cordoba was considered to be one of the largest cities in the world. Some consider it to actually be the largest city on earth. There was 200,000 houses, 600 masjids, 900 public baths. That's something that Europe had forgotten about. They didn't bathe. And the more you didn't bathe amongst the aristocrats, the higher you were. So they did not bathe. Okay, this is everybody, 900 baths, 50 hospitals. Look what he's doing for the public, the society. Marketplaces, commerce, 15,000 weavers, and you have markets with all types of goods. One of the markets that, if you want to see a market that still keeps some of that old spirit, it's in Istanbul, the Grand Bazaar, they call it. If you go to the Grand Bazaar, you'll see one section for ring makers, another section for cloth, another section for gold, another section for silver, another section for weaving. So that's how they set the bazaars up, right? And so This is an amazing bazaar. Water is flowing throughout the city. Aqueducts. For 10 miles in any direction, the streets were lit. Imagine this, lighted streets at night. Paris and London, it took them 700 years to reach this level. 700 years. Now, how many Europeans learn this in their history? They don't learn it. But this is how their civilization went up. The Renaissance of Europe, this is how it developed. This is where they learned how to advance their society and set the stage for their universities and for the industries that they had in many parts of Europe. So this is an amazing achievement, and this is what we can call the rise of civilization. Okay, so you can see the rise of civilization, and it's still rising up. And we're going to look at the stagnation part. You can start to see aspects of stagnation coming in. You can see the rulers, and especially the place where you really see your stagnation, it shows first, is amongst the leaders, especially if they have a lot of power. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna li kulli umma fitna, wa fitna to ummati al-mal." Every nation has a trial and test. And the trial and test of this nation is wealth. It's money. That's our test. And so you can see the rise. And human beings, there's no perfect society. There has never been, the closest to a so-called perfect society was in the time, the Khulafa al-Rashidin. But even they had problems because human beings are troublemakers. That's us, right? We're never satisfied. So there's always a struggle, and shaitan is real. So the forces of evil are always there, tugging against you. Okay, so there's always a tug of war that goes on. But they were able to reach this amazing height, there, and to transform their society. So you could say at that time that what was left clearly in the hands of Muslims at that time. You see, in the north, you have Asturias and Leon. And then you have, Aragon. And they started losing some of these areas first. Okay, it was over in France. When they originally took over, they went right up almost to the top, but there's a mountain range on the top, in the top of Leon. And the forces of Trinitarians started spilling over and taking back certain areas. But still, they were well in control, of the society. These areas in the north were the high mountainous areas. It was not really the fertile, areas that are more toward the center of the country itself. And so this is, you could say, in the Umayyad dynasty, okay, where it had reached the rise. Okay, and this is European history. And this is what should be studied, by not just Muslims. It should be studied by Europeans. But the problem is, in order to do that, you have to include Muslims as part of your society. And there were millions of the people there who were white Muslims. They were Europeans who had embraced Islam. So there was a point where the Swiss, the French, the Germans, Constantinople were paying respect to the Khalifa here in the West. The Khalifa in the West. You see? So this is a rewriting of history that needs to be done from a Mecca-centric point of view, from our point of view, to be able to really understand, how the world, we need to start thinking not in a Eurocentric way, right? Based upon, the way they think. They say reconquista, reconquest. They had destroyed the place and it was liberated, okay, by the Muslims. So I want to open up the floor for any general questions that anybody may have concerning the rise of civilization. Just think about some of the points. If you have any questions on anything, floor is open for any general questions.
There's a question online.
Okay.
Is what Abdulrahman did to pave the way for the rise of the of a great civilization, infrastructure, agriculture, relationship with non-Muslims being modeled in the Arab world currently?
This, if you look at most of our governments, they're doing the opposite. This is what I'm saying. They need to study this. They need to implement this because unfortunately, what has happened, see, we are in a post-colonial period. Our countries were controlled by European powers. They came in with weapons and with communication and treachery, and they conquered the Muslim world except for high in Afghanistan, in the middle of Arabia, some parts of Ethiopia. There's certain places they could never conquer. But other than that, they dominated the main areas of Islam. And so when they eventually, they got corrupted themselves and lost their power. But what they did was they trained people in their languages and in their customs, and they put them in as the leaders of the Muslim world. So this is a type of post-colonial rule that you're dealing with. So you'll see many of the leaders are very secular people. They have nothing to do, with Islam. Or they're tyrants, tyrannical people who have an Islamic face, but they're actually tyrants. And what is happening now is that there's a change which is coming about. And, the cycle isn't a perfect cycle. You go a little way, you go back a little bit, go forward a little bit, but if you look at the masses of people, I still say that there are more people who understand Islam now around the world than we've had in decades. Because in the colonial period, Islamic education was crushed. And if you go to the parents of people who have come from the Muslim world here to Canada or to the United States or to Europe, you'll see most of them have a very weak Islamic education. Islam was mainly in the madrasa. So the few maulanas or sheikhs in the madrasa, they know, but everybody else has secular education. Now, Islamic education is being more widespread. More people are asking about it, studying, more younger generation, more people making salat, more hijab, more things like never before. So it's actually rolling up, right? But the problem is the last place you're going to see it is in the leadership now, because the leaders are secular and they're placed in position. Now,
There was another question. This was about the topic you finished off with. They were asking if it was during the Golden Age that you were talking about.
yes. So in the golden age of Andalusia.
They didn't mention.
Yeah. So when we generally, when we talk about the golden age of Islam, you can say from about the time of just the Prophet ﷺ, just after his time, up until about the 15th, 16th century, then you can see that that's really, part of the golden age, of Islam. And so this falls right in the middle of it. This is the golden age of Islam, because this is where the Muslims set the pace for the world. Not only here in Spain, Baghdad, Cairo, Timbuktu, Morocco, many places, there were great universities. So we were like leading the world in education at this point in time. And especially around the year 1000. They did a survey once, in the year 2000. Remember 2000? And they said that there's going to be a bug in the computers. Everybody was really afraid of the year 2000, right? But 2000 was a change. And for us, everybody's like, okay, Time magazine, I believe it was, or Newsweek, did a study. What were the largest cities in the year 1000? So they looked at the largest cities now, like Mexico City and Delhi and, whatever, Cairo, whatever. They looked at some of the big cities. What were the largest cities in the year 1000? 6 out of 10 were Muslim places. 6 out of 10 of the largest cities on earth were in Muslim countries, like Cordoba, Baghdad, Isfahan. These were like the largest areas in the world. So it was the golden age of Islam, during this time. Yeah. Any other general questions that we have?
If they were so powerful there, why did they not venture to go into France?
Yes. Now, this is a good question. And because of time, we don't have really the time to go into all the details because we're just looking at the relationship of Morocco and Spain. But in the time, that 40-year period, when after Tariq ibn Ziyad, they actually ventured into France. And just after that, they actually went into France, crossed the Pyrenees Mountains, and they went down into France. But the French got together and they defeated them. One of their heroes called Charles Martel. Charles Martel. He defeated the Moors in the Battle of Tours. This is what they teach you. Right? Tours, right? So that halted the Muslims there. And actually, Musa bin Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad, their intention was to go right across Europe to Damascus and take all of Europe, right? Overall, that's how Tariq was, right? But Damascus said no. They stopped them. You can't do this. You're going to cause all kinds of political problems and everything, like this. So there's a natural border. You can see where it turns yellow. France. It's a mountain chain called the Pyrenees. So that became a natural border, there. And then the Pyrenees chains, I guess it extends along the northern coast of Spain. There's a mountain range also up in there, high in that area. And that's Leon, high up in there. And during Tariq's time, some of the Trinitarians hid up there in those mountains. And it was so cold and deserted and desolate, they said, just leave them alone. Because eventually they're going to come out anyway. But they didn't. And they started to regroup from the mountains and come down and take section by section, especially if they could get a Muslim who would turn against his brothers, right? Fighting one, fighting another. That's the best way for them to conquer. And we're going to see this in our next class, inshallah, when we show the decline. Now you're going to see the decline. We show the rise. Next week, inshallah, we want to look at the decline. What are the reasons for the decline? Because we need to know this. We know the reasons for going up. We saw it with Abdulrahman II. We even saw Abdulrahman and Consolidation. Now we have to learn for the decline. Questions anybody has?
Did Ibn Khaldun have any Amazigh roots?
No, he was Hadrami. Hadramaut is Yemen. So he was from Arab stock. His family goes back to the Sahaba's time. No, he was an Arab. He wasn't a Amazigh.
There's another question. You said that some leaders built masjids to leave behind a legacy. Do you think that they should have helped the poor more instead of spending money on building extravagant palaces and masjids?
Yes, this was a problem. This was a weakness there. And there's a story of a wise man who came. He looked at Medina to Zahra and Medina to Zahira, and he said, you beautiful cities, every house in Al-Andalus had to give something to build you. But eventually, you're going to rebuild every house. And eventually, after Mansur died, in a short time, there was a revolt of the people. And they tore down the two cities. They tore them down and took off all the different limestone and all the things like that and rebuilt their houses. Because it wasn't right. It wasn't right. And that was a weakness of Abdulrahman and Nasir. He didn't have to do that. That's a human weakness.
So the excavation that they're doing is not finding the city, they're just from blueprints or whatever they can come up with, they're just rebuilding something similar to it.
No, yeah, well, this now the picture that you see here, they actually, if I can take it back to it, yeah, that right there, that red color and all that, they've rebuilt this. Because the actual place is just like ruins. You see those buildings there? It's just like stone, because what it originally was, it was totally covered over by grass and dirt. And somebody saw some kind of stones, and they contacted some scientists and historians, and they came in and started digging and realizing this must be Medina to Zahra. People knew about it from the history books, but nobody knew where it was. Or Medina to Zahira. Nobody knows where it was. Even now, they don't know where Medina to Zahira was. It's underground. You know what's interesting? Even the Great Pyramid was at one point underground. And it was a tip sticking up. And then they start digging all the way down. So I'm saying, the earth reclaims. So it reclaimed this area completely. And now what's going on is excavation. So when you walk here, you'll walk through the ruins and you can see it's amazing because you see that's where they cooked the food. This is where they lived. This is where the gods were. Then they have the palace. This picture here, I think, is where his palace was, right? Which is back more toward the mountain side. So they're actually trying to do it over now and repaint it, to make it more, bring it back up to life as to what it was. But they have to go way down to the street, which is almost like a half a mile or something. Grass underneath it, they can dig. It was a wonder city. It would be one of the wonders of the world at that time, Medina Azahara. But again, it's an untold story, because if they tell the story, then they have to show that it's a Muslim leader in Spain who was doing that. So where's the Moors? Where's the stupid Moors who did nothing but kill people? They'd have to uncover the story. You see? But it's being uncovered now. And there are more and more Spanish people. Even in the city itself, there's a group of Spanish, white Spanish people. They've embraced Islam. And at the outskirts of this city, they have a community. And whenever we would visit there, we would visit the community. Alhamdulillah, they have masjid, they have madrasa, and they're European Spanish Muslims who they were Christian originally, saw their roots, in Islam, and they came in. Because their history has been covered, right? And that 781 years is part of their history. And those who are on, especially the youth want to know. And especially then you can get it. And to get more information, see if there's any other questions.
Yeah. Somebody's asking, how did it get underground?
How they get underground?
How did it get underground?
It was covered over. I mean, if you have a building, you'd be surprised. Those who know building, especially in areas where there's a lot of rain and sun, grass, dirt, everything covers it over, man. In a short time, you'll be surprised. It just gets covered over, man. The earth claims it. Yeah, it's amazing. So here on the screen, while the adhan's are going off, these are some books suggested reading. Because you wanted some information, these are some good texts that you can get.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
So we'll close here. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil